Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. It is June 7th, 2022, a Tuesday, and we're going to be speaking about what will be happening tomorrow, June 8th, and to the nation thereafter. With legislation being introduced by many Democrats, gun legislation that will be affecting 165 million gun owners in America and the future of the safety of all Americans. This is an important subject. We hope you'll listen to the entire video and then give us your comment. Now, we do want to mention if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we welcome you and thank you for being part of our audience. In addition, we want you to know that every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all social media that the internet overlords will allow to be able to hear your voice, to hear what you have to say about the issues that are affecting us all. From anywhere in the world, we want you to exercise your First Amendment right because it's not just an American right, it is a birthright of everyone. And we hope that every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, regardless of what your country may think, regardless of what the internet overlords think, that you will share your voice with us on the issues that matter. With that said, we all know that there have been far too many mass shootings and school shootings in America. Although America is not the leader of the world in mass shootings, nor are school shootings and mass shootings isolated only to America. That just isn't factually correct. But it is something that we see often in the news media, especially in election years. There's a huge spike in reporting of these mass shootings whenever there's an election year. It's something that we've seen and we have seen consistently for 45 years. Approximately every year, 20 mass shootings occur with about 100 individuals that are affected. And this has been consistent, some years being higher, some years being lower, going by the FBI standard of what is a mass shooting. And various organizations, various news media outlets will change the way that they count what is or is not a mass shooting. The number varies significantly depending on the source that you're looking at. But even with that said, the biggest question isn't really how many mass shootings happen. That truly isn't a question. The real question is, how do we stop mass shooting? How do we stop school shooting? How do we stop gun violence in general? That is a true question. And perhaps one of the biggest questions, which we ask often and have asked for 15 years on this channel, is what causes an individual to decide that the only choice that they have is to harm another individual, to harm innocent human beings, children? If we can answer that question, we believe that we would be much closer to being able to get an effective answer to the question of how to stop shooting. But we don't have that answer. In fact, very few politicians are even asking that question. The news media certainly never asks that question. So, in the face of not asking the proper question, that leads us to the question of, well, how can we stop gun violence, mass shootings, and school shootings? It's a difficult question. There seems to be no consensus, although for the last 45 years, we have heard from Democrats, and they have said the answer is to restrict the access of firearms by the American people. And we've heard this over and over again. It has taken many different forms, whether it is a gun ban, whether it's a restriction on magazine sizes, whether it's laws like the New York SAFE Act, or red flag laws, or other variations of these laws. It is essentially always the same thing. Americans are restricted in their access to the Second Amendment. They are denied the ability to exercise that, either through restrictions by licensing or restrictions of cost. That is consistently what we have heard for the last 45 years. And over the last 45 years, this has never worked. That is a fact. It is an irrefutable fact. The New York SAFE Act has never stopped any mass shooting. We know that just looking at Buffalo, looking at the New York subway attack. We know that that is not effective. We know that red flag laws, created in 1999 by the state of Connecticut in reaction to the shooting of Sandy Hook, it does not work. It is not effective at stopping suicides, as has been reported by the University of Duke University, nor has it been effective at stopping mass shootings. That is true. All 19 states that have enacted red flag laws to this date have not been able to prevent mass shootings, suicides, nor have they been able to stop gun violence in general. That's just a reality. Now, the news media does not like to frame it though. The news media likes to look at this argument and to project it in an emotional status. Let me give you an example that you will see tomorrow. A fourth grader who survived the massacre in Uvalde, who went through a horrific event, is going to be recounting the horrendous situation that he had to go through. Something that no child, no adult, no human being should ever have to be subject to and have to live through. And rather than continuing to get treatment that I am sure is absolutely necessary, rather than being protected, she's going to be put on display for Congress and for all of the major news media who are assuredly going to be providing this to the public live. It is intensely difficult for adults who are experts in their field, who are familiar with being in the public eye, to sit at a hearing of Congress and to speak about an issue. There's a lot of pressure, especially when it's an issue that affects so many people and you know that it's being covered nationally. And yet, we're seeing that Democrats are exploiting a child who just went through a massively traumatic event. And she's going to be sitting in front of Congress, reliving that event. It strikes us at our core that this is wrong, that this is taking advantage of the child and the emotions of Americans who will be heartbroken to hear of what she had to do to survive and the event that she had to go through. It is emotional, and it will drive people's passion, but that doesn't mean it will result in a positive impact. It is being used so that people will scream, do something. Just like Joe Biden mentioned last week on Thursday, do something. One of the worst things that could be said to any politician on any subject whatsoever, because it does not mean do something effective, do something efficient, do something to make it better. It just means take an action so that we Americans can go to sleep at night thinking something was done, even if the result was not beneficial to the main public. And this is the core problem here. What will happen, as expected, on June 8th is that survivors of mass shootings, selected mass shootings, will be speaking to Congress, talking about the trauma that they had survived, as Democrats will turn around and say, well, this means that we must restrict the ability of law-abiding citizens to be able to defend themselves, without any countenance for the fact that law-abiding citizens can end these incidents by being protected with the Second Amendment and being able to bear arms. That is a fact. These incidents end when an armed individual confronts the mass shooter every time. That is a fact. Whether that results in the death of the mass shooter or not, it is always when an individual who is armed and is able to confront the mass shooter when that incident stops. And the sooner that an individual is able to do that, the sooner the event stops. And we have seen this consistently in every state of the nation for the last 45 years, whether that is a law enforcement agent or it's a civilian with a concealed carry or open carry of a firearm and confronts that mass shooter. These are facts. They are irrefutable. They may not be well publicized, but they are the facts. When the American public is not motivated by emotion, they reject what Democrats have offered over and over again. In fact, if we look at each of these bills, looking at red flag laws, which came because of the emotion behind Sandy Hook, looking at what happened in New York State with the New York SAFE Act, also in reaction to Sandy Hook. It is the emotion that propels these laws that restrict the ability of an American citizen to access their Second Amendment rights. In fact, we have heard from individuals like Beto O'Rourke, like Kamala Harris in the 2020 presidential election, Justice Stevens and many others that have said they want to revoke the Second Amendment. They want to deny the American people the ability to defend themselves. Some people will say that's a good idea, and many people will say that isn't. See, America is roughly evenly divided on this issue because 165 million Americans own a firearm, something that is not often mentioned by the major mainstream media. 1 out of 2 people, every other person in America has a firearm. In fact, not only one firearm, but on average, 2.5 firearms each. There are 350 million firearms in America. And it is also a fact that 99.994% of all Americans that own firearms are lawful owners of those firearms and do not pose a threat, nor have they ever posed a threat to the public. That is a fact as well, often not mentioned by the major news media or politicians that have a political agenda at heart. We must understand these things to understand what these laws are actually doing. I understand the emotion. I understand the intent of do something. But we must understand the reality to understand the real impact. So given that fact, who are these laws actually targeting? We're going to take a look at 2 of them specifically. We've been talking about this since last week, and we've been talking about gun control in general, again, for 15 years. But one of the things that we're seeing, one of the most recent proposals, which is coming from Congress, one lawmaker who wants to essentially to stop Americans from being able to exercise their right to a Second Amendment to own a firearm by making it financially impossible for the poor and minorities and many Americans to ever be able to own a firearm. Representative Don Beyer of Virginia is looking to propose a bill. And in his bill, he is identifying and looking to place a 1,000% tax. I'll say that again, a 1,000% tax on firearms that American citizens can own. And that list of firearms goes far beyond AR-15s or AK-47s, what some in the media and many Democrats would like to label as assault weapons. For an aside, let's stop for a second and mention, what is an assault weapon? Because that does exist. An assault weapon is an automatic weapon. That is a machine gun. And it is possible for American citizens to own a machine gun. That is a fact. It is allowed by the Second Amendment, and it is also allowed by the NFA, the National Firearms Act of 1934. It just means that American citizens must go through a special license. That special license would allow an American citizen to own a tank, to own a rocket launcher, to own flamethrowers, to own machine guns. And in fact, 730,000 machine guns are owned by American citizens right now. Again, these are facts that are rarely ever mentioned, if ever mentioned, by the mainstream major media, and refutes the statements by Joe Biden, as we have heard him say often, when he says that you can't own a cannon. That is a lie. You can. Americans do. So that is an assault weapon. What Democrats are targeting when they say AK-47 and AR-15s are in fact semi-automatic rifles. These are hunting rifles. These are rifles some people use for sporting, weapons that people use for defending their homes. It is a semi-automatic rifle. It is standard in America. the name AR-15, the name AK-47 have been immortalized by Hollywood, but that doesn't change their function, which is anything but what Hollywood has put forward. The reality is the same as any other semi-automatic rifle, they just happen to be popular brands. With that understood, let's go back to Representative Fire. And this is from CBS News. Even though most Americans continue to favor stricter gun laws, that there is a caveat to that. It depends on what type of gun law is being proposed, not just overall restrictions. They go on to say Republican lawmakers have opposed banning semi-automatic weapons like AR-15, opposed banning semi-automatic weapons like AR-15s. Well, they're banning semi-automatic rifles, which would include AR-15s, and Democrats know that, which have been used in many mass shootings and whose ammunition travels up to 3 times the speed of sound. Well, correction. According to the FBI data, according to data done in multiple studies, the fact is that only about 2% of all mass shootings involve semi-automatic rifles of any make or model, which would be an AR-15, an M16, a Ruger Mini 14, any type of semi-automatic rifle. In fact, the majority of all mass shootings occur with handguns, which is an entirely different subject and something that generally Democrats don't target. So to say that it's used in many mass shootings is a misrepresentation going on. With price ranges from about $500 to $2,000, AR-style firearms, or in other words, semi-automatic firearms, are affordable for many consumers, just like any other rifle going on. An excise tax of 1,000% would mean an additional cost of $5,000 on a $500 weapon, and an additional $20,000 for a $2,000 firearm. Think about that. Who is this targeting? Who is this Democrat? Representative Don Beyer of Virginia. Who is he targeting? Is he targeting criminals? Criminals don't pay taxes on illegal firearms that they get and they use. There is no tax on that. In fact, just over the last year, we're talking about 7.5 million new gun owners, which predominantly were Black and women. They're the gun owners we're talking about, and they're the ones who are looking to protect themselves as police are being defunded, and we are seeing restrictions placed on police officers, and we are seeing violence increase in our cities across the nation, whether it be because of bail reform or other policies that Democrats have put forward. We know that since 2020 that we have seen a huge 30% spike overall in violent crime in the United States, including homicide with a firearm. Because of that fact, many individuals, many who are Black, many who are women, many individuals across America, Democrats and Republicans and Libertarians and even Green Party communists alike, are getting firearms to protect themselves. And if we see that the majority of Americans, 165 million Americans, are subjected to a tax, millions of people will no longer be able to protect themselves. That means that the majority of Blacks and the majority of women who just in last year were the first-time gun buyers, they would be denied their right because of money. It kind of smacks of something that we saw out of the Jim Crow laws, where you had to pay a poll tax. And if you could not afford the tax, then you could not vote. It is very much in that same vein. It's very much like H.R. 127 by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, which would include not just additional licenses, but also having to go through training courses, having to go through psychological reviews. The cost would be astronomical, denying the poor and minorities and women the opportunity to actually exercise their rights. It is an end around the law and the Constitution. And many people should be upset by that just on that basis, making sure that only the rich and the powerful will be able to protect themselves and their families and their property, leaving the poor defenseless. But it is not the only thing that is troubling about what we are hearing from these proposals. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's take a look at KENS News, and I wanted you to hear what they have to say.
Senator John Cornyn saying they need to be realistic about gun legislation, although he knows it will not be easy. Democratic negotiators say they should reach an agreement by the end of this week. It could include enhanced background checks, incentives for states with red flag laws, and investments on school safety and mental health.
So because of the emotion that has been put out, and because of the way that the news media is covering these stories, we are seeing Republicans are negotiating on something that they do not agree with, and their constituents, overwhelmingly, seen in poll after poll, do not agree with. We're looking at enhanced background check. In how many cases, time after time after time, have we seen that either an enhanced background check or a background check in general has failed? It has failed in New York State, in California, Illinois, 3 of the strictest states for gun ownership in America, with enhancements on the background checks that fail. So background checks don't really work very well, especially when we take into account the criminal element, which is an individual who does not follow the law. Criminals do not get licensed to own a firearm. This is not effective, but it does make it more difficult for an American citizen to gain a firearm. 99.994% of law-abiding citizens will have more difficulty, even if you're looking at a state like New York, where it's not just a one-time license and background check, but once every 5 years, which allows the state the opportunity multiple times to deny you your rights. In addition, she mentioned an enticement, an enhancement of allowing states to gain red flag laws. We're going to go into that a little bit more deeply. Actually, let me go into it right now. Red flag laws do not work. Red flag laws have never worked. We have discussed this over and over again. This was from our December 2018, when we were going over the idea that the government is going to protect you by denying you your rights and leaving you less safe. We have gone over this many times, including in Senate Bill S-2521 and Senate Bill 2604, which were red flag proposals, and they are flawed. They do not work. In fact, looking at New York State, which we provided on August 21st of 2018, we presented members of the New York State Assembly and the New York State Senate a comprehensive review, which includes over 150 different sources addressing red flag laws and their effectiveness and all studies that have been done on them and the relevant information about gun control in America. And the fact is, they do not work. There is no better example of this than looking at the Buffalo shooting and the New York subway shooting. And especially the Buffalo shooting, an individual who had in his high school was identified through the red flag laws and did not stop them from committing a mass shooting. Because red flag laws, one, don't target those who generally commit school shootings, which tend to be individuals who are under the age of 21 overall, nor does it target individuals who commit mass shootings, who are roughly in the age of about 25 on average. No, red flag laws target individuals, married 47-year-old men, and therefore it misses a large group of individuals because it is meant to target suicide attempts. And even there, it is not very effective. There is a storyline that is going around, and it's been stated by CNN and, of course, by the press secretary for Joe Biden. Red flag laws stop 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 suicide attempts, which is a lie. That is a misrepresentation of the fact. In fact, They are talking about the Duke University study done on red flag laws, targeting the oldest state, the original state of red flag laws, Connecticut and Indiana, and looking at the effectiveness. And what they are quoting to the public is an estimate that potentially 1 out of 20 people who have their rights restricted by red flag laws may be stopped from using a firearm to commit suicide. Not that they are stopped in total, because many of those individuals, about 34%, go on to commit suicide through other means. It would take, for every red flag law, 19 Americans have to be denied their rights. They have to be subjected to red flag laws, the scrutiny and the embarrassment in their public life, at their workplace. They have to have their rights denied, their children taken away from them. 19 Americans have to lose all of that to maybe stop one person. And that isn't even conclusive. In fact, in every study that has been done, there is no evidence that red flag laws stop suicides, nor that they stop mass shootings. So taking that into account, when we listen to Senator Cornyn saying that Democrats they're negotiating and red flag laws are one of the preeminent things that they're going to try and encourage more states to do, or possibly pass a national red flag bill, well, we have to say it doesn't make sense. It has never made sense because it has never been effective. It has never lived up to the promises that have been made. Let's look at what you might have heard from another news media source. Let's look at Good Morning America, and let's hear what they had to say about reaching a deal on gun reform.
George, good morning. Well, senators met late into the night. Democrats do not want to let these talks drag out. They want to reach a bipartisan deal on gun reform by the end of the week.
Why are they in such a rush? Why is it that we must get a bipartisan gun reform bill passed immediately? Is it because of the emotion of the American people? Or is it because the need is so great? Because quite honestly, the need isn't that great. It isn't that different than in 2020 or 2019 or 2015 or 2000. It has been consistent. So they're pushing forward now because they have the momentum to be able to use the emotion, as we have heard from Rahm Emanuel, former aide to President Barack Obama, that never let a crisis go to waste. Use the emotions that are available to pass legislation that you could otherwise not pass. That is what is happening here. This is a marketing gimmick. It sounds harsh, but it is also real. And that is what is being done. But let's continue.
But several Republicans have signaled raising the age to purchase a semi-automatic rifle. The type of weapon that was used by the suspects in Uvalde and Buffalo is likely off the table.
Why would they say raising the age, which New York State has done, raising the age to 21, which is probably unconstitutional? Why would they say that that isn't a good idea? Besides the fact that a case in California state of California lost in a similar case about raising the age limits and restricting individuals from being able to have a firearm based on their age at 21, because it doesn't stop a criminal. Criminals are not prevented by the law. The age limit could be even higher. As an example, looking at Uvalde, the criminal, that mass shooter, a demonic individual, had a handgun with them. That handgun is illegal for someone 18 to be able to possess in the state of Texas. They broke the law. They had a firearm that was illegal to have, and they took it with them in an attempt to kill innocent individuals. The fact that it was a law and there was an age limit did not stop them. It has not stopped any mass shooter. Let's continue.
Many Republicans are just against this. They believe that the age is appropriate, or they say that it should be left up to the states to decide. So, Senator,
there's another question. What about states' rights? What if in your state, like many states across this nation, the public do not believe that this is an effective answer to the question of why does someone decide to harm innocent individuals. That this would not effectively prevent gangs or other criminals from being able to access firearms and to use them against law-abiding citizens. That in fact, this would deny law-abiding citizens the ability to defend themselves. Let's go on.
Are considering ways to strengthen background checks by possibly allowing juvenile records to be screened if the gun buyer is under the age of 21. Also on the table, incentives for states to enact red flag laws, which would temporarily take guns away from people considered to be dangerous, as well as funding for mental health and school security.
Okay. Democrats in Congress are looking to give incentives for red flag laws. That means they are going to give states money. They're going to give them your tax dollars to pass a law that has never stopped mass shootings and is not effective at stopping suicides. The two things that red flag laws are noted as being responsible for. And there is going to be a financial incentive for not only for states to be able to add these laws, either on a national level or on a state-by-state basis. They're going to be incentivized by getting money, your tax dollars for this. They're also going to be incentivized to actually have Americans charged, go through red flag actions to deny them their rights and due process. We're paying for people to be punished without a law ever being broken. But they do mention that they're also looking to have funding for mental health and school security. Now, these are two things that we have seen. In the review of the Parkland shooting, we saw that those are two things that were requested and stated would help to make schools more safe and to reduce the number of mass shootings in Florida. Many states have said this. The key to stopping these events is confronting the shooter as soon as possible with an individual who is also armed. Yes, a good guy with a gun. So of those three things, the only thing that seems to make sense is mental health funding and improving the security of our schools, which would include arming individuals to be able to confront those that would attempt to kill innocent children. Instead, they want to pass legislation like H.R. 2377. Now, we've talked about H.R. 7910 in recent videos. We've talked about New York State and some of the laws that have just been passed here and how they have been ineffective and will be ineffective going to the future. H.R. 2377 is a red flag bill, a national red flag bill. It is very similar to Senate Bill 2521 and Senate Bill 2604 from 2018. There is no real difference in these bills. An individual will be able to make a charge. They will make a claim. The state, the government, will issue a warrant. A judge will issue a warrant without ever telling you about this, without giving you the opportunity to defend yourself. And they will say, here is a search warrant going to the local authorities so that those authorities will come to your home, usually between 5 and 8 a.m., and come in to your home and take all firearms that are present and deny you your Second Amendment rights. In addition, as a consequence of that, your children, if they are present in the home, must be taken by Child Protective Services because a home that is so dangerous that you lose your Second Amendment right is too dangerous for that child to remain in the home. And then, only after you have been punished, then is the only time that you get the right to go to court and to try and defend yourself. That is what every red flag law in America does. In this, I want you to notice that in the definitions that are listed here, you will not see a definition for the term imminent danger. Red flag laws at their core believe that because someone is an imminent threat, they pose an imminent risk to either themselves and or the public, that the government must step in. Except there is no description of what an imminent threat is. What does that mean? If you look at New York's red flag law, it would mean that you may have bought a baseball bat or a steak knife or a screwdriver or any any item that has ever been used to cause harm to another human being. If you're drunk, if you're angry, if you make a silly tweet that maybe you thought was a joke and others didn't see the joke, these are all reasons that you would be considered an imminent threat. And this can be done according to this bill in Congress. Not only can a family or household member, a dating partner, someone you are dating, an ex of yours, someone you had formerly dated, can fill out a red flag law. I hope you have good breakups and they're always amenable. Otherwise, you could have a red flag law placed against you. Someone who has lived with you as well as and or married to you, an individual who lived in your home, a roommate, as well as a domestic partner. So individuals who have tangential relationships to you could in fact place a red flag action against you according to what Democrats are looking to pass. An ex-wife, an ex-girlfriend, ex-boyfriend, or ex-roommate, they are all capable of passing red flag laws against you. Now, I do want to be clear. There is a clause in this bill which is unique because almost no state has a caveat that if someone files a false red flag, then they would be punishable by $5,000 fine. Except the key word here is they have to believe that you are a threat. That is it. And so as long as they can say that they believe your statement, your words, your actions meant that you were a threat, then they have every right to put a red flag action against you and will never be punished, even if there is no true credibility to the claim. That is something that is never addressed by the public, by the media or politicians when talking about red flag laws. When you look through this bill, as I have, reading it all, it matches up exactly with every single red flag law in the nation at this time. Here's something else about red flag laws that are very, very important to understand. And I'm trying to take a large amount of information and parse it down so that you can get this very simply. When we look at the red flag laws, you do not have a Second Amendment right. You do not have a right to privacy. You do not have a right to due process. You are never notified about this until after you have been punished, even though no crime exists. And in over 80% of all red flag actions that have been taken, no crime is ever alleged. But yet this is supposed to be able to protect you. It doesn't. But again, this is very much like what we see being offered by Representative Don Beyer of Virginia. He's looking to punish American citizens. He's not looking to protect people. 1,000% tax does not affect criminals. That affects law-abiding citizens. We also see that the red flag laws are target individuals that have never committed a crime. Does this make sense to you? Let me ask you, do you believe that criminals care what a law-abiding citizen will pay to own a firearm? Probably in a way that you wouldn't think. If that is the law, and that means less people are able to own their firearms, criminals who have firearms have an advantage against the unarmed civilian. We see that red flag laws and other gun legislation, limiting the size of magazines, limiting the types of firearms that are available to the public, well, they actually help criminals. Because again, it leads to American citizens being less capable of being armed and limited in the things that they can be armed with to defend themselves. Because the criminal doesn't care. That's something that no one addresses in the mainstream media. That's not what you're hearing from Democrats in Congress. They will never address that factor because they want you to be afraid and they want you to think they are doing something, which they are, but not something that's effective. Should there be forms of gun control? That is a debatable question. and compromise can be found in that. But the compromise should be based around the idea of making people safer. Putting up a sign that says this is a gun-free zone doesn't stop a criminal. In fact, some of the most deranged of these individuals, like in San Bernardino, like in Florida, have gone out and attacked Americans because it's a gun-free zone and there are fewer individuals to be able to protect themselves. You may or may not agree with everything that we have just said. That's fine. What we want you to take into account is when you are watching a fourth grader tomorrow sitting in front of Congress, reliving a trauma that she just went through, both for the entertainment and emotional value the Democrats will take out of it to try and push forward a law, I want you to stop and think, is this going to prevent another fourth grader from being injured? Or is it going to make it more likely that a crazed mass shooter will go out and face less confrontation, less challenges from the American people, and therefore make those kids more in danger? It's a difficult thing to have to think about. But if we truly want to protect our children as well as each other, we must think about this. We say again to you, H.R. 7910, H.R. 2377, the gun control laws passed by New York State just the other day, they have never worked. There is no reason to think they will work in the future. We must have an honest conversation and stop doing the same thing over and over again. But we want to hear what you have to say. We want to hear what you think. We thank you for your time today, and we hope that you'll be well.